Welcome, everybody, to the OPEX Remote Coaching Podcast, the Competitive Conversations edition. Today, we're brought to you by our newest sponsor, water. Sam just kind of flashed it in front of you. It will hydrate you. It will nourish you. It will quench even the strongest thirsts. And it's abundant and free in a lot of places. So you should look into it. We don't have a code yet, but we'll get that set up. But for today's show, we are going to be discussing kind of a yearly layout of CrossFit training, what your year could look like, and some characteristics of different times of the year. And that's just basically to give some general context to our main topic, which is the current cycle that a lot of our athletes and clients are getting into, about to get into, or are already in, which is in prep for the CrossFit season. So we're going to touch a little bit about that. If you have any questions, you can just hit us up in the comments. We'll get them live. And if you are just now listening to this or on Spotify listening to this later, you can always hit us up with a question. So let me get into the notes. Yeah, you got anything to add?
No, sure I do. Yes, so we're going to talk about the COMPETE program, which is one of our programs that we offer at OPEX Remote Coaching. This one's specifically focused for the competitive CrossFitter, and it's geared specifically for those that are wanting to maximize their performance in the quarterfinals. So everything we're going to talk about has that intention in mind. So keep that top of mind when you're listening to what we're going to get into. There will be things we talk about with regards to training cycles and different phases of training that have applicability outside of that. But most of what we'll discuss is the COMPETE program that we have, what they're doing in training, and how we're preparing them for the open quarterfinals in March and April of this year, 2024.
Yes. Yeah, so the COMPETE program is one of our programs, like he said, and he kind of alluded to, is made for those who are interested in performing at their best in the quarterfinals. So that is who it's for. If you are interested in competing your best in the quarterfinals, if you feel like you already have competed, not just participated, you are trying to do your best in quarterfinals, you're not yet at that bubble or semifinal level, and that's your goal, then the COMPETE program would be a great place to start if you didn't have a coach, or you're not already following a program, or you're not satisfied with the current program you're following. Why we write the COMPETE program? Well, it's a great way for us to get in contact with more athletes and a larger audience. And it is a little more price effective than working with a one-on-one coach, or maybe you want to learn about the style of coaching that we offer. And this is kind of a good broad strokes general program for those who want to do that. So maybe you want to work with a remote coach, or you want to work with one of us, but you don't know if that's the right step for you yet, or for some reason you just aren't ready. This could be a great place for you to start. Why is our program different? Well, it's going to be different from kind of what we're going to be talking about today. So I won't go too much into detail, but we take a lot of time and effort into laying out the program. And we use the same practices we would use in our individual approach. It's just not as individualized because we don't know the exact person we're working with. So you're still going to get the same level of structure and planning, and same theme and characteristics of what we would be designing for somebody. It's just going to be, again, a little more general. Anything to add on why it's a little different?
I think if somebody did jump into it, they would notice a lot of differences in the training comparative to other big, well-known training blogs and templates. While it's still a template program that we're writing for an avatar, there's a lot more attention to detail with respect to progressions, the attributes we're trying to develop, a long-term vision for the training and the development of the people doing it, instead of just giving people really fun and fancy workouts. So there's a lot more intentionality behind the training. And as you allude to, it is a representation of what we do with our individual clients, because You and I, of course, work on it together now, but before you came aboard, it was my project, and I was trying to bridge the gap between what I do with my own clients and what I would do with, a group of clients or a large group of people who have a similar goal, and they're kind of similar in their ability levels and what they need. And so this is our to date best offering that allows us to cater, like you said, to a wider audience, while giving them more intentionality in their training and hopefully setting them up for better success over a longer period of time inside of the sport. So there will be some big differences when you get into it compared to some other well-known programs. And I say that because I've paid and looked at other programs, and I can just see how they do things, and it's they're not very similar. There might be a couple out there, so I'm not going to say they're all bad and don't look as high quality as ours, but for the majority, there's a big difference.
Yeah, because the OPEX team has put out some good coaches out there, and they may have their own program, so it might be somewhat similar. But so talking about how, then again, we're talking about how we're a little bit different, and that's what we're going to go over, is kind of the layout of the season. And you said that it's not just fancy workouts, it's not just workouts, it's actual training. So I said structure, and I said there's a lot of thought behind it, and that's because there is. And we're in a sport. We are in a sport, just how any other sport would have a structured layout throughout a year. So if you think of something like football, American football, or you could just, or soccer, but for to make it a little easier, because the football season in America is super simple to follow. There's a large off season, there's a preseason, and then there's the regular season. So in the off season, you're not going to be seeing guys running tackling drills and wearing pads and doing stuff like that. In the off season, they're honing their crafts. They're doing a lot of the things at a base level that would carry over to the regular season. Fast forward, they have their little mini camp where they finally put some stuff together. They start running routes. They start implementing what they have trained and learned during their off season, putting it together. Then they have the preseason where they start facing other opponents, which is basically them just doing a glorified practice against somebody else. And then the real season starts. And there's a lot of different characteristics in each portion of those. It goes for any other sport. A tennis player isn't just playing tennis against an opponent year round. Yeah, they might compete year round and do stuff like that, but they have different phases and different styles of training that they're performing, especially given certain ability levels. It's going to look different for a beginner and an advanced person, which we'll get into a little bit. So that's what we want to kind of chat about, is our season layout or our yearly layout, because we're not always in season, and there needs to be a difference in the off season and the type of cycles and training we're doing, because the off season, we're trying to prepare ourselves in order to be able to have a really good preparatory and preseason phase so that we can express and compete at our highest ability. So that's what we're going to get into next.
Yeah. A couple of things to add. So when you have a date that you're preparing for, DATE, that gives you a loose roadmap of how you're going to navigate yourself to the date. And so for this program, given we have a date, which is the quarterfinals, we operate the whole year and what we're going to do based around that date. So that acts as a nice general guideline for how we're going to do things. And to what you gave as an example of football, it's the same thing, where you have a specified amount of time that you can work on characteristics that you want, so that when you do compete, you're as prepared as possible. So the principles are the exact same. And as a result, it influences priorities. So we can't have all the same priorities all the time, because they're not going to get better. So we have to adjust what we're going to prioritize, what intention we're going to have as well, given the time of year relative to the date. So if we are farther away from the date, the priority is going to be very different than if we're a month out from the date. So that's very important, and something that can get lost in programs if there isn't intentional shifts in what we're trying to develop as the year goes on. Second, because it's a program, you can stick to more general principles in progression, in structuring, in phases of training. Because again, you're trying to go for the average person of the group. But when you have an individual, so when it's one-on-one, you can be more specific and you can adjust things as needed. So to give an easy example, if I have a client and we're moving through our training progression and things are going well, but then they get the flu and they get sick for a week, it's going to be very, I would say counterproductive, but there's a strong possibility it'll be counterproductive if I keep trying to push the progression as if they didn't get sick, because the system just went through this big stressor. It was inflamed. They probably lost a few pounds. They're probably dehydrated. Their fatigue's a little bit more elevated. So we have to adjust course due to that situation. Whereas in a program, you don't have that luxury if 3 people get sick, like, because 205 of them are not sick. So you kind of have to just keep going forward. So we have to stick to good general principles with the program. Whereas when you work individually, you have the luxury of being able to adjust that as needed. So that's an important foundational aspect that will tie into what we're going to talk about with the different phases of training, because it allows us to be very black and white in how we're going to do things, because it's a program.
Yeah. So let's get into the phases. I'm going to post them into the comments. So if someone's listening, they can kind of check and look at them. If you're on YouTube, you can go back to the live comments and look at it. But if you're on Spotify, you'll just have to listen extra carefully. But the first phase is accumulation. And we're thinking off season here. So if you know anything about general periodization, accumulation phase, that's what we're basically talking about. So you can think of this as, let's just say after your deload, after your competition season, from there until roughly now or later in the year, you have a large off-season gap. So you want to talk about accumulation real quick?
Yeah. So the best word to describe, let's say 2 best words to describe an accumulation block training is learning and building. So you're trying to learn new skills, you're trying to learn better pacing strategies, you're trying to learn improve technique, you're trying to learn different gears, etc. Like, you're just trying to learn, a lot of learning. And the second was building. So while you're learning, you're also building practice, building repetitions, exposure, etc. So those are extremely important, because if you use those as your guiding light for the intention of the phase, you can get a lot more out of what you're doing than if I just need to burn it to the ground all the time. Because if you're burning it to the ground all the time, you're not learning, and it's hard to build, because if the intensity is very high, the volume is, it's going to be very hard to have a lot of volume. Intensity and volume they run opposite. So that's very important concept to keep in mind when you are going through building phases, which are also known as accumulation phases. Learning and building.
Okay, I have a if you're interested in learning really in depth about this, you can head over to the Coaching the Competitor course, which Sam has designed and taught, and it's on video. It's in the link in the bio. So if you really wanted to get into more of that, but I have a little quote from there about the accumulation phase, and it says, due to the overarching goal of the accumulation phase being learning, which he just discussed, the intention inside all of its various characteristics must center around this goal. So, like he said, the goal is to learn. And if you have that intention with everything you do, then you'll get more out of the phase than you would if you weren't thinking that. Or if you were thinking, I'm just racing, all I'm thinking about is getting better, getting faster, getting stronger. So the learning phase. So you have this large learning phase. Go ahead.
I was just say, let me quickly run through some of the characteristics just to give a little even more context. So characteristics for accumulation phase: skill learning, refinement, progression, volume exposure in accumulation, metabolic exposure in accumulation, technical focus over technical fatigue. So that's why I mentioned refinement of technique. This is where you would focus on refining and improving technique. You're not trying to challenge or stress technique. Improvement in movement limitations and or injuries. So if you are injured, this would be the type of training that you're going through to help improve the injury or mitigate it. If you have movement limitations or imbalances right to left, this is the type of phase where you're giving specific focused attention on trying to improve that. Improving lifestyle, this is really important, and I think a lot of people don't think about this. Due to this type of training being less intensive physiologically and psychologically, this is a great opportunity to spend time upgrading your lifestyle, upgrading your sleep routine, upgrading your nourishment, upgrading your hydration, upgrading your routine, upgrading just your overall flow and how you do things, so that when you get into more intensive training, you have better scaffolding and support built to handle the intensity that's going to be placed on your system. And then the next piece was lowering of overall mental emotional stressors. So because you're not as stressed in the training, you have a little bit more bandwidth for other things. So it allows you to just kind of handle things more effectively. And then developing rhythm and habits. So again, this is also why most of the year it would fall into this bucket, because you want to spend most of the year building this really robust base, so that when you get into the more challenging phases, you don't wither as quickly, which happens to a ton of people in a ton of programs because they don't think about these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So accumulation, like you just said, we're learning, we're training, we're spending a lot of time developing the rhythm and the consistency and the outside stuff, because you don't want you don't want January 1 now to be the time where you're thinking, all right, now I'm going to be waking up at the same time. Now I'm going to be doing X, Y, and Z. You should already had trained and prepared that. So now when things get more difficult and more stress comes with training and with competition, that's already a staple in your life. Because if you try and change it now, it's very stressful. It's hard to make these changes. And on top of more stress, it's going to be even harder. So we've accumulated all of this good training. You're better at your muscle ups now. You're smoother in your lifts. You're stronger, and you can recover better. You can handle more volume. So now you can start to, now that you've widened your base a little bit, we can build a little bit taller in the pyramid, which is introducing the next cycle, which is the transition period or transition cycle. So this is what we'll talk about a little more at the end, because this is the cycle we are in currently in the Compete program, and we'll be entering in starting Monday. So I'll give the quick little note from the course, and then you can go through the characteristics again. So for the transition cycle, it's worth noting from the start that transition phases are not staples in the planning process like accumulation and intensification phases are. Transition phases can be helpful for the right athlete at the right time.
So yeah, if you look in periodization literature, I'm fairly certain, if I remember off the top of my head, I could pull out one of the books right here, but I don't want to. There isn't like a classified type of phase of training that sits between accumulation and intensification, but there is they do speak to there being this blending of one to the next. Mm-hmm. So that's what this transition. That's why I call it a transition phase, because if when you get into coaching, writing programs, and of course you learn different phases of training, you learn how to write different phases of training, you learn the different characteristics. What inevitably happens is you write an accumulation phase, and then you go, okay, now I got to do intensification, but it's so different than what I was just doing that the jump is way too big for 99% of the people. And so the stress is too much. The change in stimulus is too great. And while that might be a good thing, like in the short term, because it's going to drive adaptation really quick, it's not a long-term strategy, because you're not allowing them time to solidify the adaptations you're trying to drive, so that when they go into more intensification or challenging training, they actually express the skills effectively and they consolidate it. They like cement it into their system. It's not a transient adaptation they gain. So what you're trying to do then is you need a bridge from this building, refinement, skill practice, improve technique, minimize injuries, imbalances. And it's like I need to start to slowly introduce intensity to get them ready for more of it, more fatigue, more metabolic challenge. So this transition phase is where I'm blending the two. So aspects would include introducing more intensity, shifting training intention away from building to starting to touch would be the right word, touch intensity, and start to challenge skills a little bit. And then 3, begin to lightly challenge skills. 4, begin to lightly expose athletes to technical fatigue. So what we talked about in the accumulation phase was there's we're removing technical fatigue because we care about technical efficiency and the refinement of that. So we don't want fatigue in the picture. Whereas now we're going to start to slowly touch some technical fatigue because we want to start feeling it. We're not going to throw them into the fire yet, but it's like you need to start touching this. And then assessing the athlete's ability to handle intensity and recover from it. So of course, that's the staple of, well, most sports, but specifically CrossFit, is how well you recover from intensity. So what is the goal of an intensification phase? Well, it's to challenge the athlete's ability to recover from intensity. So in the transition phase, we're starting to see and assess how well are they handling the intensity, because we're starting to dose it in a little bit, and are they recovering effectively from it? And if not, then we probably need more time spent there, and or we need to look at lifestyle pieces to ensure that like everything outside of training is supporting the recovery from intensity. So that is what we're doing with the transition phase.
Got it. So yes, we went accumulation to transition, leading into intensification. And kind of like he said, there's this ramp up period because we can't go from this accumulation phase where we're doing not as much intensity or not as much fatigue or near failure training. We can't just go jump into that. Most people can't just jump into that. So this phase allows your body to prepare itself and to kind of learn how to get ready. And it could be just psychologically a good period for people to really start to get into the mental gear of understanding how hard you need to work and how fast you need to go. So that leads into the intensification phase, or you could think preseason. So this is like you're now practicing and you're implementing things that you might see in competition so that you can prepare for the competition. So the closer we get to competition, the closer your training will start to look like CrossFit, essentially. So intensification,
Yes.
Here's the little excerpt from the course. Its primary objective is to stress test the improvements made during the accumulation phase, shifting the athlete's focus from learning and refining to testing and stressing. So those characteristics of learning are now shifting into the characteristics of testing and stressing the system. You've now built yourself up more than last year. So hopefully now we can test and improve and stress more and recover from it.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. So yeah, this intensification, intensity, challenging skills, stressing the system. So now would be the time where we're actually really challenging the system. There's probably more opportunities in the week where you're doing pieces for time, or you're doing some sort of tester, or there's less control. There's a little bit more chaos, a little bit more difficulty. Some of the things written down. Lower overall volume. That's really important. That's something I think people get wrong often. Accumulation and intensity run opposite each other. And of course, volume and intensity run opposite each other, because accumulation is synonymous with volume, and intensification is synonymous with intensity. So when you're building, there's in principle a lot more volume because the intensity is less. So if the contractions are less intense, you can do more of them. That's simple logic there. If the intensity of each repetition or contraction is really high, then you can't do as much because it's going to cost more. So we have to be mindful of total volume when you get into intensification, because if you do too much, or if you keep the amounts high, you're asking for an injury, for burnout, too much fatigue, or loss of fitness characteristics because the system just gets overworked. And you actually don't, your adaptations are not great. It becomes almost counterproductive as well. So higher intensity per session. So if the volume is less, then the intensity of each session is probably a little bit higher. There's fewer correctives, so there's less structural based work, because it's all about trade-offs. Like if I want more output with potential and to really push the system, then I got to give up things that are going to cost energy for this person. So I got to pull out things that aren't necessary. Resembles the sport more, like you talked about. Possibly more unsustainable work, meaning work that is pushing you towards your limits of effort. And then technical durability under fatigue is challenged. So now you're actually trying to strain the technical efficiency of people. You're trying to find like what the threshold is for where technique starts to break. You're trying to flirt with that line. So definitely testing and stressing are really good words to describe what are we trying to do with this phase. And as a coach, if you have like a central word or two that summarizes the intention of the phase, it can be very helpful in removing a lot of things that aren't that useful. So if you know, like, okay, after I write this first week of this block, I need to have some sort of emphasis on testing and stressing, you'll probably write something that's pretty effective for that person. And you'll be able to easily pull out things that are probably not going to fall under that umbrella.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So 2 things to note. Testing and stressing, 2 big words in this. That doesn't mean that that's all we're doing. We are still training in this phase. You are still training up until the competition.
Mm-hmm.
The training just looks a little bit different, but it's still training. You're not just coming in every day and it's like 30 ring muscle ups for time, 1 RM snatch, and day 2 is 5K row with 100 burpees for time. You're still training. It's just the characteristics of the training looks more like the test, and it's starting to get a little bit tougher. And then same with the accumulation, back to when we're accumulating. That doesn't mean we wouldn't test things in the accumulation phase. Your training just isn't biased around that week to week. You're still going to have testing, and we're still going to check in on KPIs, but they just would look a little bit different than what they would look like now. So it's just characteristic changing, not like we're not training anymore. You don't need to I just don't need to follow anything right now. I'm just testing. So we're still training, which would lead into the competition phase and the pre-competition phase. Which, do you want to get into that, or you want to cap it there?
Sure. Yeah, pre-competition phase, just to close the loop. So this, of course, would be the last phase before competing. And you could almost think of this phase as scrimmaging, which is well known in other sports, where you're getting practice and iterations of what you're actually going to do on game day. So that's what we're trying to do in this phase of training, is start to give more exposure to what you're going to have to do when you compete. So it's like specific practice for game day. So we're sharpening skills, we're preparing the system physiologically, psychologically for competition, lowering the overall volume. So this can get a little finicky, because you don't want to lower it too much, because if you lower it too much, you can actually lose some fitness characteristics. So you have to be strategic with ensuring they're getting enough volume in so you maintain their fitness, and you maintain their dampening, because if you pull a lot of volume back, their power can get really high, and then now the system's not dampened as much as it needs to be for competition, and that can be a problem. So there's a intricate balance of enough volume but not too much, and then a lot more sport specific work. So you're possibly doing well, actually that's the next thing, competition simulations. So those are the actual scrimmages. This is something I've talked a lot about, whether on Instagram or past podcasts. We're leading, like within 3 to 4 weeks of competition, you're going to want to run through, if it's a multi-day competition, you're going to want to run through a multi-day simulation of the competition. Events that might be the same or similar to what you're going to have to do. You're going to want to try to follow the same type of time setup. So if you do one event at 11, then you try to do one at 2 o'clock, whatever it might be, you're trying to replicate it as closely as possible. Because what you're trying to do is not only practice, but you're trying to give your mind a sense of certainty around what you're going to have to do when you get there. Because when you get to competition, you're very anxious. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of unknowns. It's a different environment. There's a lot of things you can't control. So leading into that, you're trying to develop a sense of control around the things that you can, And so going through the motions of preparing, walking through an event, doing an event, cooling down, you'll be able to carry that to competition, and you'd be surprised at how big of a difference that impacts competitors on game day. You can tell easily those that did proper prep before the competition because they show up, they look like they know what they're doing, they do their warm up, they do what they need to do on the competition floor, they execute their plan. So it's just being a little bit more of a professional before competing, and that's why we use sometimes 1 to 4 weeks of training geared towards getting people ready for competition, which is what I classify as a pre-competition phase. And I'll let you read the little blurb for it.
Okay, yeah,
I won't take that from you.
Oh, let me go. Yeah, those are mine. Yeah, here we are. Okay, pre-competition. The primary focus is on sharpening skills, refining techniques, perfecting timing, strategizing. I said a little stroke. Practicing tactics, and closely monitoring performance. This phase is characterized by testing, peaking, tapering, and specific preparation. And what Sam was alluding to is you don't want to show up on competition day and feel like you have so many things to prepare for and think about. You need to, workouts released, your mind is thinking, this is what I'm going to do. I've done something similar, or you've had so much exposure to a lot of different types of training and testing that you're now just in your thoughts organizing what the workout's going to be. You set up your camera because you've practiced that. You just run through the workout. Obviously, some people might be a little more meticulous. They need to write down some splits and some times and some goals. But overall, that's what you just want to focus on. Like he said, the warm up, you don't want to be jumping in thinking, all right, what should I warm up? I need to start Googling best way to warm up my overhead squat or whatever it is. If you have a coach to help you, like, hey, here's this general warm up, you can make adjustments if needed, but you've likely already been doing specific warm ups and preparations for specific workouts or movements already, and you should already be doing that. And that's what he mentioned with professionalism. It's something that you're going to do. It's not something that you're going to think and test, as in like try out something the first time when you get to quarterfinals. It needs to be something that you're just doing. You're being. That's who you are, and that's what you're going to be doing during this phase. So the pre-competition is really going to help you do that. You should already be doing that in other practicing this skill as a principle in other phases as well. But the pre-competition just lends more specifically to the workouts you're going to be doing, because you might do a workout that's, a chipper of 50 GHDs, 50 cal row, 50 overhead squats, 50 burpees, 50 toes to bar. You might have done something specific, and that's what it's going to look like. So you already know, and you know what you need to do for that, how you need to prep your system, and then get ready for another workout. You don't want to be scrambling. You want to be focused. That's maybe those are like the sub 2 words for that phase. No scrambling, only preparation. Yeah. So,
and it's worth noting too that we're of course speaking to somebody who is taking their training seriously and they want to do great on game day. So if you're listening and you just train and you enjoy training and you're curious to learn, then that's great. But like a pre-competition phase only makes sense if you're going to do a competition. If you're not, then you don't need to do this type of training or have this in your training year in any way, shape, or form. So all context is always key here. Just wanted to make that note.
Yeah. No, that's because our intention is to compete. So it makes training
and the people in this program.
Yes. Yeah. That's exactly what I meant with our.
Yes.
Putting myself in that group. Okay, so now where are we in this time period? We're not yet at pre-competition. We're quite far out. We're close, but we're quite far out in terms of training. We're getting ready for that. So what most of our clients or athletes who are competing are in, and the compete program starting Monday, is the transition phase that we had spoke about. So we're going to have a 4-week transition phase starting Monday. Spoiler, I'm going to show you Monday's workout and possibly Friday's workout. Nice. So you can steal it and you can try it before you join, if you have that in your mind. But we have a few more kind of notes and thoughts about that we're going to share with you about the transition phase, and then we're going to talk about how we kind of implement them within a training day, so you can kind of see it and have some context on what training would look like, and maybe a little bit of like things we did right before that to make sense of why we're here now, and things we might do a little bit later, so that's why we're doing it now and how it could prepare us for that pre-competition phase. So you want to go over the controlled intensity?
Yeah, sure. So as we chatted about when talking about the transition phase, you're moving from accumulation intensification, you're trying to bridge that gap. So you're starting to slowly introduce more intensity for the individual to get their system ready for more of it in intensification. So controlled intensity kind of refers to this controlled dosing of it throughout the week. So it'd probably be easier if we look at the week of training. If you took like a week of accumulation, and then you looked at a week of the transition phase, and let's say there was one hit in the accumulation week that was pretty intensive or somewhat intensive. Now with the transition phase, there might be 3 hits, or maybe 2 hits, and maybe the total time spent is a little bit more than it was in the accumulation phase. That's not to say time is the sole determiner in the dose response. The person, modality, intention equals the dose response. So never stop at time. There's a lot more that goes into the dose somebody gets. So with intensity, which is, of course, this is where we come up with we come up to our limits with a program, because it's not just a person, but it's like an avatar, an averaged avatar. And then we of course have the modality, so we know what we're going to be doing. And then assuming they have the right intention, we can kind of get a good dose. We can get an educated guess on the dose. With an individual client, it's different, because I know the person, I can give them the right modality, and I know what intention they have, and then I can get a dose that's a little more on the bullseye. So we're just outside the bullseye, but pretty close.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the next piece is skill elevation. Similarly to what he was just talking about, we're adding a little more intensity to the skills. We're introducing a little more challenging scenarios or challenging environments to the skills, whereas accumulation, maybe we're doing for example, EMOMs of muscle ups, doing unbroken sets, improving our cadence, our skill. Now we might be adding, let's just say, a perturbation or something. We're adding something to it to challenge it, to make it a little more difficult. For someone that might be just riding the assault bike and then performing the muscle ups, others that might be just performing other movements with the muscle ups, or just making the muscle up session a little bit tougher by restricting the time, or giving specific specific reps to hit at specific times. So it's getting tougher. It's not yet testing, but during the test, you're going to be more fatigued. So we're starting to introduce that same level of energy consumption or stress to it, so that you're a little more familiar with it and prepared when we do the more intense sessions. You want to hit on metabolic resilience?
Yeah. Last 2, metabolic resilience, psychological conditioning. Metabolic resilience, metabolic conditioning is bolstered during this period, establishing a robust foundation for the intensified challenges ahead. So again, sounds like fancy words. In practice, the intensity is more controlled in the accumulation phase. So you're using constraints to corral the person towards a certain type of intensity or outcome. And then now, in order to slowly start to challenge their metabolic system, start to push it a little bit, build a little bit more resilience, so it can handle intensity more, you start to adjust some of those constraints, and you're trying to expose them to a little bit more chaos or a little bit more uncertainty. So that's loosely what it looks like. Again, probably for the future, it's a lot easier if we pull up a day and we can easily use it as a reference. It's harder talking about it without a reference, but it doesn't matter. We're going to keep going. So psychological conditioning. Transition phases also develop psychological resilience by I'm not even going to try to say that. Increasing the level of stress on the athlete, they're becoming more methodically. There we go. I don't know why I was trying to say method. By methodically increasing the level of stress on the athlete, they're becoming more accustomed to what is expected in the forthcoming intensification phase. So think of it this way. If you've never trained, if you've never exercised before, and then somebody tells you to go out and run for 20 minutes, that's going to sound like the worst thing you could possibly do because it's going to be so uncomfortable. But if you ran every day for the last 10 years for 60 minutes and somebody says, go run for 40 minutes, you're like, that's nothing. That's less than what I normally do. And it probably isn't that intense. It's not going to feel that bad for you. The relative perception of effort is very, very low. So in training, of course, you're trying to move that needle up over time. Like your RPE needs to be improving with the same task over time. So through these phases of training, we're trying to get their RPE and also their acceptance of discomfort a little bit better. I don't have better language to use there, but you're just becoming a lot more willing to handle something that's a little bit uncomfortable, along with your fitness getting better, so that you don't perceive it to be as difficult as it would have been, 4 or 5 months ago. So this transition phase is starting to get that in action where, you weren't doing much intensity. Now you're doing a little bit more. You're getting a little bit more comfortable with intensity, so that when you get to the intensification phase, when you see thrusters, burpees, and muscle ups, 5 rounds for time, you're okay with it. Like your body can handle it. Yeah, it doesn't feel great, but you're okay to do it. Whereas 4 months ago, that would have been a real slog. And then another piece of that, without going down a rabbit hole, is if you kept everything the same except you change the date in which you do it, you drastically change the intention and the RPE for that person, or not even RPE, but the willingness, like the motivation changes, the intention and motivation changes. So for example, doing burpees, muscle ups, and thrusters in June is a very different intention if you don't have any more competitions. A very different intention than if you did burpee, muscle ups, and thrusters in February, because you know the date is coming. So you are going to push, and you're more motivated to do it. So, and I can say that empirically, I can say that anecdotally, I can say that if you've done it, you know what that feels like. Like the intention is so different because the date is close. So that's an interesting dynamic of this whole equation, is how dates influence the intentionality of a person or an athlete, and how that can play a bigger role in the dose response and the outcome than anything you write. So again, without going down that rabbit hole, but that's just an interesting curveball that can get missed.
Yeah, when you see 28 days left on the whiteboard, you got a little more gear than when it says 78 days. Most people, not me. Yeah. I'm always ready.
Yeah, or 100. Of course.
Yeah. It's funny because when you think about it, it's like if you saw 100 bar facing burpees for time, and November and December, even that would be pretty close to competition training. That's like you feel that one in your stomach, even if you're trained, even if you're very prepared. But then when you see it, after have done a lot of that style of training, or maybe you're doing a little muscle endurance build of a lot of burpees, and then you see it in February and you're like, ooh, like you're ready for it. You're like chomping at the bits to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So let's go over Monday. We have this upcoming Monday. So maybe we can give a little bit of a little bit more context to what we were talking about. This is the first day of the transition phase. Let's see here.
There we go.
Hopefully
can you share the screen?
See that pretty well. Yeah. Can you see it well? You can see it, correct?
I can now. Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we have there's a little warm up above. We don't want to release the secret warm up, but it's up there. So you would have a warm up. This is kind of how you would see it. This is similar to what you would see in the app. But we got part A. We got a clean complex. We have a 1 slow pull power clean, and then a 1 hang squat clean below the knee, and a push jerk. 12 minutes to build to a tough set. No misses. We're just trying to get one kind of tough touch on this. This isn't the time to PR. This is just, I'm hitting a strong load. It feels good. It was tough, but I have a little more in the tank. I'll just kind of go over the whole thing. Part B, we got the clean grip deadlift. We have 3 sets. We're just going to do 5 reps, 5, 5, 5. They're touch and go with good control. The first set's light, the second set is moderate, and the third set is tough. So only one tough set. Then we have every 2 minutes by 10 sets at a fast pace, quick reps. We're going to alternate sets, so 5 of each. The first set is 6 to 8 alternating pistols, 4 bar facing burpees, and then 2 squat snatches. The second set, we're just doing that in reverse. So at the start of the second minute, you're going to do 2 squat snatches, 4 bar facing burpees, 6 to 8 alternating pistols. The weight starts moderately, and then we're adding a little bit. The goal is to add a little bit of weight each set. The load shouldn't be too challenging, meaning like it shouldn't be a heavy load where you're, like nearing top end percentages. But it's challenging, but you still need to be doing fast singles. And then we're finishing the session, part D, 3 to 5 sets, 8 to 12 GHD hip extensions with a pause at the top. And then we're going to rest 15 to 30 seconds. We're doing 4 alternating sandbag or D-ball to shoulder at a moderate weight. Might be a little heavier for some, but the goal is to be a little more on the moderate side. And that's the full session. So anything to add real quick?
A quick note. Yeah, I was just going to say, some people might look at that and they might think that's not a lot. Well, why does it need to be more? Like, why does it need to be more? This is week 1. And the goal is to build and to keep building and to keep getting better. And so sometimes you got to take a step back and go, okay, maybe I do need to do a little bit less, but it needs to be greater quality. And also by doing a little bit less, I have room to build. That's something that a lot of people run into, especially in the world of CrossFit and functional fitness, is they forget that you need space to build. And so if you start too quick or you start with too much, you'll run into a roadblock really fast. In a lot of traditional sports and progression models, they do a good job of that because they keep it very black and white, and a lot of the things they do are very black and white. Whereas in our world, we have a nice dynamic training environment because there's so many things we got to do. So it's easy to get doing too much. So this is a great example of like, you're getting enough in and you're going to be able to execute with great quality. And then next week we can build upon it. And we can build upon it. We can build upon it all the way up till March, April. And then that's going to set you up for great success. So, this is a really good training session, and it's going to set up people well for the rest of the week too. Because we got to remember, you got 4 more big training sessions that you're going to do in the week, and we want all of them to be great. And so if you're smashed after one, your quality is just going to get worse and worse as the week goes on. So these are things you got to be thinking about when you're writing designs for anyone, whether it's a group or for an individual.
Yeah. So a little breakdown on, let's start with part A because it's the first one. It's the clean complex. It's just one tough set, or, it's 12 minutes to build to a tough set. Before this, you might've been doing a lot more reps, or a lot more sets, and it might've been a little bit tougher overall, like across the board, tougher sets. We've done a lot of technique work. We've honed in on these skills. So now we're just trying to touch on it, do one tough set. So you could think of this, I'm still getting in practice. It's, it's a complex. I'm doing multiple positions within the clean and jerk. So it's still helping me practice and hone my skill of doing that. It's breaking it down a little bit. So again, more on the practice part, but it's not digging in too deep and we're not pushing it too much. It's also going to allow us, like, hey, I know, or I'm a little tired. Let's just say this is a Tuesday or another day, or in generally, I'm just a little more tired, and you don't want to expend all your energy on hitting an 88% lift. Well, here you may be able to drop 15 pounds, and next week you feel better or worse, and you can adjust a little bit. So a little bit of auto regulation there. Moving into part B, part A, a little bit of a primer and prep for that as well. So now we're practicing and doing a tough set on the deadlift. The first set is light, second set is moderate, and the third set is tough. This can help us start learning to take bigger jumps. It's still working on on building our strength. So we're still working on that. We're doing a little bit of skill work, you could say, with the touch and go. So we're practicing some touch and go. But again, it's only one tough set because we're not trying to dig too deep right now. We need a little more in the tank, especially with part C coming in. So before, we might have been doing some, heavier deadlifts with eccentrics and pauses, more reps, tough singles, stuff like that. That's a little more intensive that you wouldn't be doing now because we're not necessarily practicing that. Our sport isn't powerlifting where you need to do a 1RM deadlift. Yes, we may have to do that, but overall, you'll still be prepared to do something tough in regards to our sport for a 1RM. Part C, now we're working on some snatch battery. So we're doing a little bit more volume on this compared to the other two. The other two hopefully didn't tax you as much, so you can really perform this well. We've previously, Sam had built up a lot of single leg and pistol volume, and the Compete program had been working on that. So if you're seeing this, you're like, oh wow, like I haven't done any pistols. Well, you would have if you had done the program previously. So now we're blending the pistols, the skill work, the bar facing burpee, which is also a skill, but it's also, in this scenario, we're calling it a skill because you need to be good at that, going into the snatches. So, and then in reverse order, same thing. But overall, we're now building our battery because we've already done some battery work with the bar alone. So now we're starting to introduce other pieces with it because that's what you're likely going to be doing. And the squat snatch and the clean and jerk, which we do in another session, are great movements to practice with battery and to practice in a session like this because it transfers to a lot of stuff, but we do a lot of metabolic work with the barbell, like a squat snatch or a clean and jerk in various forms. So this is a good way to push that. And we want to still build proficiency in those lifts too, because the smoothness in those lifts will also transfer to other things as well. Why we're increasing the load, it would be great if you just did all the sets at 225, but that's not the point. We're slowly building the volume. Like he said, we're leaving some more in the tank, and we want to end with something a little more challenging than what we started with. So if you start too heavy and you end up missing lifts, it's like, well, we missed the point here. We're trying to build our battery, which means we're trying to do something that takes a good amount of energy and recover quickly so we can do it again, and recover quickly so we can do it again. Think if you're doing 20 squat snatches for time at 185 pounds, if that's a fairly tough load for you. The problem isn't always the snatch. It's now I have to recover, and when can I hit the next snatch? So this is what we're training here. We're trying to, that's why there's 2, and then let's just say next week there's 3 or 4 or whatever it is. We're training that you can do one and recover quickly and do it again. So moving to part D, now this is, we still have in this phase, we still have a little time and energy for more volume, and it's a good time to work on some strength accessory work. So 3 to 5 sets, so you can kind of regulate, maybe you're really good at this stuff and you want to do more. Maybe you're really wiped out from the session and, you don't feel quite as good. So you just need to decide what is going to be the right amount and quality volume for you. We have 8 to 12 GHD hip extensions working on the bending pattern, mixed with some more bending accessory, which is the sandbag. We likely wouldn't see the sandbag. I'm just going to say we won't see the sandbag in quarterfinals, but that doesn't mean it's something we shouldn't be preparing and training. Strongman and odd object training within the sport is important. And especially in the past 2 years, we could say it's almost like a cornerstone within the sport, especially if you're making it past the quarterfinals level or if you're doing other comps. So it's just a good thing to train and a little different, and it can build strength and resiliency in your bending pattern a little more than, let's just say, a deadlift would. Yeah. Anything to add to those?
Yeah. The one thing I wanted to add was when you write programs, write training for people, you're always trying to think about like, what's the priority? So you're trying to think about what's the priority in the session, what's the priority in the week, what's the priority in the cycle. So this session is a great example of the priority is the C piece. Like that's the most important piece of the training. But it being the priority doesn't mean it's going to be the first thing you do. Because in principle, you usually bias highest priority item first, and then it kind of dwindles down as you go along. But sometimes you want the priority piece to have front-loaded fatigue, or you want things that prime the system for the priority piece. So in this case, A and B are acting as primers for C. So the nervous system is getting ready to handle the intensity and lifting of C by doing A and B first. That's also why it's built to a tough complex instead of doing one complex every 90 seconds for 10 sets, because that'll accumulate too much fatigue. And that's also why B, it's only one tough set. 2 of them are easy, because that's also going to lower the costs on the system. So now the system is primed, fatigue isn't too high. So when you go into C, you can execute it really effectively and get a great adaptation, which is what we want. And then D, of course, being accessory work. So that's another insight into thinking about why does the training look the way it does? and where might the priority be in the session so that I can focus my energy accordingly on that, because that should be something that athletes, clients are thinking about when they do look at their training is, okay, what is, and sometimes, of course, you can just ask your coach, like, okay, what's the priority piece here so that I can ensure that my intention is focused on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is, again, Monday. I'm going to bring up Friday real quick. We won't go, we'll chat about it, but we won't go in as much detail, but we'll run through it so you can see another day of the training program. Let's present, share screen, window, and this one here. Okay, so this is a little harder to read, but I'm going to read it for you. This is Friday. So in the compete program currently, Wednesday is our rest day. Thursday is a training day. So this would be the second training day following Thursday. This is Friday. We're starting with some skill work. So we're still doing skill work. We're still practicing those skills that we had talked about. It's not, I mean, you could say you're not completely fresh, but you're still a little more fresh than you would normally be, because there's still time to, in this phase, to work on skills that aren't just under any fatigue or under a little bit of fatigue. There's always room to still work on skills, especially if you're really lacking in them, to work on them with less fatigue involved. So we have 3 rounds, not for time, which is 30 crossovers, rest as needed. So rest until you're ready. And then 1 handstand pirouette, rest until you're ready. 30-foot handstand walk, rest, and then another pirouette. There's a note, you can add the pirouette and the handstand together if you're really proficient in these, and that's going to be simple and easy. But overall, we want to keep this skill based, meaning we want really good reps, and we're not like falling over, or you're not trying the pirouette 4 times. If you know yourself and you're like, I'm not ready for the pirouette yet, you would just need to make that, add in like another drill or something for that. Same goes for handstand walks. Next, we're working on barbell cycling and speed practice. So now we're working on some touch and go work, working on moving some load to the lighter barbell. So this necessarily wouldn't be considered battery work. So we have 25 double unders, 3 sets at a fast pace, 25 dubs, 5 bar facing burpees, 5 touch and go power snatch, 5 overhead squat, starting at a moderately light load. And then you can add a little bit if you feel good. We're going to do the same thing again, but we're doing 3 sets with bar facing double under, bar facing burpee again. Then it's touch and go power clean to overhead and front squat. So we're touching on these things. You might see this in competition. A lot of people's favorite thing is to, like, I'm working on barbell cycling and I'm doing that, and they're just doing like some super heavy load, and they're just doing like 5 touch and go power cleans as heavy as they can. It's not super practical. This is a little more practical, where we see workouts where it's like, hey, you have 15 burpees, and then you have 10 power snatches at a lighter load. So you need to work on receiving the bar, being smooth, staying relaxed. This is the time where we're going to start practicing that, and it's not a ton of volume. And that's the intention is that, so it's not going to cost a lot. So that's what we're working on there, is the cycling and the speed. Moving into increasing effort cyclical sets. Cyclical meaning we're basically doing the machines or an activity that is cyclical. We got 20 or 15 cal row, 200 meter run, 20 cal or 15 cal assault bike or echo bike, rest 2 minutes. We're going to start slow. We're going to get faster each set, and the last 2 sets are going to be faster and tougher. Like, we want those to be a little more intense, and we have that noted in there. So you're doing 8 sets, you're just repeating, resting, and going again, trying to get a little faster. This is a good way to still get in some machine work, some volume work on the machines, and to practice your gears. You're building the gears a little bit. Part D, 3 sets. We have another strength accessory similar to what we did bending on Monday. Now we're doing a little push and pull accessory. So we got 10 to 12 behind the neck strict press, rest 30 to 60 seconds, 10 to 12 Bulgarian ring rows at 20x1 at a tempo, rest 30 to 60 seconds. These are moderately tough. We're not trying to, this isn't like a super strength set. We're not like going for something huge here. We want quality but tough sets, and we're working on good range of motion, quality pressing, quality pulls. So not for max load, for max quality with still being challenging. So this is what a Friday might look like. Anything to add? Or this is actually what Friday looks like.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's a lot of practice in here, and
Mm-hmm.
depends kind of on the person, because if somebody has great capacity, then maybe A and B are more important for them than C. But for the most part, C is mainly the priority piece, where, like we talked about earlier, we're starting to expose them to a little bit more intensity. And so increasing effort sets is a great tool for dosing in more intensity without giving them too much too quickly. And it also showcases whether or not people understand their paces and understand how to pace effectively. Because if you have to do 8 sets like you have to do here, if you start too fast, you won't be able to keep getting faster, and then you'll blow up by set 5 or something. And it
Mm-hmm.
happens quite often. So there's a nice learning piece inside of this around understanding, okay, if I have 8 sets and if this is the pace I'll probably be at my last one, then I got to work all the way back to the start, etc. So it makes people think a little bit more, which is good. And then, yeah, just the other, B, some good practice with the barbell, which you talked about nicely. And then, of course, the handstand and skill work as well. So a nice practice based session that is sandwiched between the challenging lifting day on Thursday, and then Friday. I can't remember off the top of my head what the Friday, or not, sorry, not Friday, the Saturday session is, but it's probably a little bit more demanding in this session. So
Yeah, Friday is very similar. No, Thursday is
I mean
very similar
Saturday.
to Monday, and then Saturday, yeah, is
Yes.
also tougher as well. So yeah, and
Yep.
then just a quick note: we talked about this phase has characteristics. That doesn't mean the design needs to look exactly like this. There's other ways to practice barbell cycling speed. There's other ways to practice battery work. There's other ways to, build volume or start building capacity on the machines. Start or refining that. So it could look like a bunch of EMOMs of, minute 1 is 10 touch and go power snatch at 75 pounds. Minute 2 is 10 fast burpees. And we do that for, 6 minutes. And then you repeat doing it similarly with the power clean. The skill work could look different, but the characteristic remains the same. So if you're thinking, we're saying that this is the only way to train right now. We're not saying that this is the perfect part B for Friday for everyone across the world. We're talking about these are great characteristics for most people, especially within the group of you trying to perform your best at quarterfinals and crack that top 300 to top, to 100 place, or, 500 and below, depending on maybe region or where you're at. So this could look different, but this is the way we're designing it right now, and this is what our compete program is getting. So this is just what we're showing you. Again, we talked about how it would look different for an individualized approach, and now we're just doing a generic approach. So this is just what it would look like in this scenario. Good deal.
Perfect.
Yeah, we hit everything here. I think we did a pretty good job of laying it out, and I don't want to say dumbing it down, but simplifying everything. And it actually it might have been a little intense in terms of information at some points, but yeah, we've hopefully at this point, you've gotten really good at good skills. You've built some good volume. You've got some quality strength sessions in. You've built your routine. You're in a rhythm, and now you're ready to attack. Not meaning now finally you're ready to start ramping up training. Training should have still been pretty hard, and you should have been building and doing challenging work this off season. But now we're just shifting characteristics. So hopefully you're ready for this point now. If you are, and if you're still listening, or if you're listening later on in the week from when we filmed it, and you're interested in the compete program or something you're interested in working with us, we'd love to hear from you. We could answer more questions you have. You could DM us, you could comment. But yeah, we'd love to have you on the program. We'd love to have you as a client. We enjoy working with individuals who compete in the sport. So yeah, we hope you learned a little bit more about kind of how we think about setting up the season, setting up the year, and about what your training might and should look like right now. Any final notes?
No, that was great. Thanks, Roman.
Yeah. I appreciate everyone listening in. We will see you next week. We got some more episodes coming. And if you have any any questions, again, feel free to let us know. If you have any topic ideas or anything you want us to touch on in future episodes, you can hit us up and we would love to cover it. So until then, we will see you next week.